1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, as the cause of space and time, this being must be an uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial being of unfathomable power.
This is the Kalam cosmological argument. This argument began its journey in the hands of early Christian philosophers, attempting to establish a beginning to the universe and God as the creator at that beginning. In the medieval period, it was taken over by both Jewish and Islamic scholars, where it gained its name Kalam, meaning speech. But for many years, it has taken a back seat to other forms of the cosmological argument, especially those established by Aquinas. However, in the 20th century, the Kalam cosmological argument was revived by the philosopher William Lane Craig.
Have you ever asked yourself where the universe came from? Why anything at all exists, instead of just nothing?
The Kalam cosmological argument, as supported by William Lane Craig, has two truth claims, or what philosophers call premises, tied together to make a conclusion. The first truth claim, or premise, is whatever begins to exist has a cause. The second truth claim, or premise, is the universe began to exist. And if we say that whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the universe is something that began to exist, then we draw the logical conclusion that the universe had a cause. To find out more, and to search for justifications for the truth claims or premises in the Kalam cosmological argument, I talked to philosopher and author Peter S. Williams.
Okay, Peter, we've been looking at the Kalam cosmological argument, which has two premises tied together to make a conclusion.
Sure.
Can you give us reasons for why those premises are true? Should we start with premise 1?
Okay, well, premise 1, just to recap, which says that anything that has a beginning must have a cause of some kind. Okay. I think defenders like Craig put a lot of emphasis on saying that they think that premise is just simply intuitively quite obvious. But then they would go on to say, look, even well-known atheists seem to support that kind of premise. David Hume, well-known Scottish sceptical philosopher, once said that he had never supported so absurd an idea as that something could arise without a cause, that something could just pop into existence, as it were, and there'd be no explanation, no reason for it arising, for it popping into existence. So it's not just an intuition shared by people who believe in a God, or believe in a cause of the universe. It seems to be an intuition that's shared by people on both sides of the debate, one might argue.
So, Peter, can you give us some good philosophical and scientific reasons for why premise 2 is correct?
Well, let's divide those defences into two types. One, sort of philosophical, mathematical defences, which were the defences in philosophical history of this, and then more recently, of course, we've had some scientific defences of this premise. Philosophically, arguments range around the idea of whether it's possible to have an infinite regress of causes, or an actual infinite set of, say, past events. Because if it's not possible to have an actually infinite set of past events, then the set of past events can't be actually infinite, it must instead be finite. There must have been a first event.
Can you distinguish for us the difference between an actual infinite and a potential infinite?
Well, the distinction between an actual infinite and a potential infinite, I think quite a good way of describing it is to say that a potential infinite is a group or a set of things that's finite in number. There's a particular finite number of things in this group, and you can always add to the group. So if we're talking about time and the universe is a potential infinite, it has a finite past, began at the Big Bang, it's, 13.5 billion years or so old, but we can always add more billions of years to its age. So the universe can always get older, but at any particular time, it's always of a finite age, 13.5 billion years, 15 billion years, 16 billion, whatever. And an actual infinity is a set of things, a group, that is composed of individual members, and there is and it's not a finite number of members, it's an actually infinite number of members. One illustration that I quite like on this is an illustration called Hilbert's Hotel. It's named after a mathematician called David Hilbert, and the illustration goes like this. Suppose that an actual infinite were possible, that something, an actual infinite set were possible. Then we could construct, in theory, this hotel with an actually infinite number of rooms in it. So suppose you have this hotel with an actually infinite number of rooms in it, and an actually infinite number of guests staying in the hotel, such that all the rooms are full. So the hotel would have the no vacancies sign on the outside. However, under the no vacancies bit of the sign would be another bit of the sign that would say guests welcome. Because if I wanted to book into that hotel, the clerk at the desk could simply phone the person in room number 1 and say, could you please move up into room number 2, and tell the person in room number 2 to shift up another room into room number 3, and so on, ad infinitum, and room number 1 would be freed up, and I would move into room number 1. And that would be fine, because infinity plus 1 is infinity. So there would be no problem. But the argument goes to think that in physical reality, rather than just as a sort of conceptual story, that in physical reality you could have something that would behave like that would be full, and yet you could add something to, is just ludicrous. It's just shows the impossibility of an actual infinite set of things existing in concrete reality.
So there were some popular defences of both premises. But next we must ask, is the argument logically valid? Is it a proof? If so, what kind? To remind ourselves of the argument again, we have premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. And from that we draw the conclusion that the universe had a cause.